Well, good morning. It's so good to have you with us today. It's a little bit easier to be here this Sunday morning than a week ago, right? And if you remember a week ago, we had ice out in the parking lot and all that, and today's going to be in the 60s. It's kind of crazy. But a day like today, you need to remember, not all Sundays are like this. So anytime you wake up with snow or ice outside your house, be sure and check our website to see if we're meeting. So sometimes church has been canceled. Last week we just had that one service, but it was at a little bit earlier time, so we had some 8 o'clock people who showed up way too early and nothing here, and then some of you showed about 10:30, and we were already halfway done. So when the weather conditions are bad, you might just want to check that just to make sure that we can all be together at the same time, because we love having you here. Your being with us is really important to us. I want to personally thank a number of you. I received a number of phone calls and notes and some emails and texts about last week's sermon. Last week we were in the Sermon on the Mount, and we looked at Jesus and what he had to say about divorce and marriage. And as you saw, I was a little bit uncomfortable, kind of stressed about that. I had lunch with a friend yesterday, and he says, you know, I've been watching your sermons on, he doesn't come here, but he watches your sermons on stream, and it says, that's the first time I've ever really seen you nervous about something. And I said, well, I was a bit nervous. Now, once I got into it, it was all right. I felt okay. I felt comfortable and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's stressful because of the text we're going to be looking at today. See, the text we're looking at today is one about being a person of integrity in your word. And one of the things I feel is a responsibility to you, but even more important to God, not to be saying one thing on stage that I'm not willing to practice off stage. And it's just so important for there to be a congruence between the things I say and what's going on in my heart and being honest with God. And so I need your prayers in this work of preaching, because what I don't want to do is be asking something of you I'm not willing to do myself. It's a little bit like this year, our theme of the year is following Jesus and serving others together. And as you know, every month we're introducing a new spiritual discipline. So our focus is not on spiritual disciplines. Our focus is on following Jesus and growing closer to him. And we're looking at different spiritual disciplines as they help us in that. So we don't ever get so focused on spiritual disciplines that we really forget about following Jesus. Instead, they serve him and bring us in relationship. But what we're looking at this month as a spiritual discipline is meditation on God's word. And part of what I do in preparing every week is meditate throughout the week on a particular text. I try to commit it to memory if possible. And I try to meditate on it because I've asked you to be meditating, right? And then I also study. I think when I gave that sermon, I talked about how meditation and study are not the same thing, but they can be complementary. And so I study. I try to see what others are saying. And so if I have some kind of insight that's going on. But what I found is over time as I meditate, and that meditation is not just a silent thing. I write during the week. I get up early on Sunday mornings. I'm here Sunday morning. I'm walking around the building, not just trying to get my steps, but I'm kind of rehearsing and talking out loud and going things. And I'll go back to the office and I'll revise things. See, that's part of that meditation where you're kind of working on something to get it stronger, because I take seriously this relationship we have called preaching. And what I want the word that I speak here to grow out of something, the word that I've heard in my heart, and I'm going, God, help me to do this. And it's very humbling. But it's one of the real honors about preaching here, because I love you so much. I don't want to be something different off stage, and I'm not willing to be on stage. I want there to be that congruence. And that's really what we're talking about in this passage from Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. I'll talk about in just a moment. Before I do talk about this, it is that one that's about oaths and swearing and being honest in your word. Now, I learned my first lesson. My dear mother, Mom is over here to my left. My dear mother taught me my first lesson of this because, see, I was in school at Dan Mills Elementary School, and I wasn't the only one who was pretty practiced in lying. There were a lot of us who were. A lot of times when you're a child, you get pretty good at lying pretty early. You know how that is, kind of stretching the truth and lie. But I had learned the technique at Dan Mills Elementary that when somebody questions you and your word, oh, there's this beautiful thing that you say, and it takes care of everything. It renews all trust. So my mother caught me in some lie. I have no idea what it was. All I know is she was telling me I was lying, and I was insisting I was telling the truth. And then I pulled it. I used what they taught me at that good education at Dan Mills Elementary School, not from my teacher, but out there on the playground. And I go, Mom, I swear on a stack of Bibles I'm telling the truth. That did not go over well with Pat Corley. Rusty was in double trouble because not only had been caught in the lie, but now I was swearing, and I'm sure that I had a little sermonette on Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37, which is where Jesus says, "You have heard it said to people long ago, 'Do not break an oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows that you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, which is the throne of God, or by earth, which is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, which is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair on your head white or black. All you have to say is simply this, yes or no. And anything beyond that is from the evil one." Now, you'll notice that Jesus uses the formula that he's been using. He used it 6 times in this section of Matthew chapter 5. He says, "You have heard that it was said long ago," and then he goes, "But I tell you." Now, you have to keep reminding yourself what Jesus is doing, or otherwise you will separate a passage out and forget what Jesus is up to. Earlier in chapter 5, after the Beatitudes, Jesus explained his relationship with the law and righteousness. And what he says is, your righteousness as a follower, as one who has come near to experience the kingdom of God, your righteousness is to surpass that of the Pharisees and of the teachers of the law. And so now what he's doing in this section is he's giving us examples of how the Pharisees think and what this righteousness of the kingdom is all about. You see, righteousness is about a right relationship. This being spiritual in my life is not just about creating some appearances that will impress you. Some of us are pretty good at building impressions with other people. We know how to act religious, and Jesus basically is going, I don't really care about that. He saw the Pharisees and the teachers of law practicing that, but he knew what was in their hearts. And you see, I've got a lot of Pharisee in me, and I don't want to see that. I like to be in denial about that. But all of us have a lot more of that way of thinking because it's the way the world thinks about religion. You do a certain thing, and because you do a certain thing, you get a certain thing from God. God's kind of watching your stage play just like everybody else is, and he's going to be fooled just like everybody else is, so keep trying to fool God. And what Jesus is saying, no, that's not the way righteousness is. The kingdom of God has come near unto you. He invites us to come into it, not out of our own goodness, but so that we might discover what it is to be blessed by the Father and enjoy his presence. And not just when we die and go to heaven, but now, in the presence of this life on earth, to be enjoying the presence of the kingdom in our lives and to be transformed by that. That's what he's talking about. So when he says, you have heard that it was said, but I tell you, he's addressing us, and he's addressing inside of me that little Pharisee that sits somewhere in the corner of my brain. And let me just say this. When I listen to Jesus talk and really listen, I'm never bored with Jesus. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There are certain preachers and teachers that I've been a little bit bored with. I've kind of gotten distracted when they're talking. You might have that same experience here on some Sunday mornings. I got that. I don't take that personally. But with Jesus, I've never been bored. But often with Jesus, I have been challenged and made uncomfortable. Now, some of those preachers who are trying to keep my attention, they don't mind challenging me, make me feel guilty and feel bad and feel shame and want to just crawl away. And there are times when Jesus makes me, I experience guilt. There are times I experience shame, but here's the difference. The purpose in Jesus is this. He loves you. And anything he would be speaking to you is to expose you to something that you are not really aware of, and you're not paying attention to, and you're in denial about it. And he's going, I want you to look at this. And he's looking you right in the eyes when he's saying this. He goes, I want you to look at this with me. That's what he's doing. And so that makes me uncomfortable. Really, if anybody ever just kind of gets right there with you, eyeball to eyeball, you kind of start feeling a little uncomfortable, makes you a little bit nervous. You know how that works? And that's what Jesus is doing. But he does it because he knows what I'm created to be. He knows what you are created to be as a man or a woman. And so as he's teaching, he's saying, I know all the tricks. I've seen him in the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, all kinds of people. See, he's a brilliant teacher. And I can never fool Jesus as my teacher. You probably have had teachers where you kind of fooled them, right? Did that thing with the homework or that thing on the test or whatever, and you kind of fooled them. It doesn't work that way with Jesus because he's always with us. And so now he's kind of moved us through a number of things, and he's come to this whole idea about oath-taking and swearing and truth-telling. And first of all, if we're going to begin to understand what he's saying, we got to go, what is going on? Well, part of what's going on is this. Last week we saw how there were a number of controversies among the legal specialists about divorce. And what would count as divorce, what reasons for divorce, all that kind of stuff. And there are great debates going on, all kinds of controversy going on, all kind of conflict going on. And when Jesus addressed that, he's going, you know what? You are so caught up in trying to win your side of the debate, you have forgotten what marriage is all about. This is what God intended about marriage. Divorce may happen, but it's not something, and you're not looking for a way to get it. What you're looking for is what is God's purpose for marriage and living on that. And basically, what you have going on now is there was going on in that society, in that culture, in that time, controversy and conflict about what kind of vow or oath was binding, so that if you broke it, you were in trouble with God. Now, you have some brilliant minds, and this is the thing you need to understand. You're not going to really get what Jesus is talking about unless you get this first. That culture is an oral court culture where primarily vows and promises were made orally before witnesses, right? Our culture, you got some of that, but not quite so much of that. But you know what you have in our culture? It's this thing called a contract. It is that written promise. When you sign on that line, I won't have you raise your hand. That might embarrass some of you. But my guess is there have been a few people in this room who've had a problem with a contract in his or her life. There have been probably somebody here go, well, I didn't know that was in there. And the reason you didn't know that was in there is because, number one, the person who designed the contract had some very bright lawyers who had come up with all kinds of loopholes to be an advantage of their client, but not really to your advantage. And it was kind of tucked away in that small print. And if you didn't read that small print, you're going, oh, they love me. They're nice to me because, well, they run that fast cash store, but they dress in my school colors on the advertisement. And they tell me they just want me to have that money. And they look so nice and they're so happy and all that kind of stuff. And so you go in, you bring that check in there, and they say, well, just sign right here. Oh, yeah, and just sign that title over to us, too. Just, kind of hold that because we love you and we're going to take care of you. Yikes. Because you didn't go take that little contract. You're going to say, I'll be back in a few minutes because you're in a rush, right? A lot of us have had trouble with some contract. And a contract is a written oath that is signed before witnesses. And in the culture of Jesus, what you had was this: oral oaths, promises, vows made. And the question was, are there any loopholes so that I can kind of, say this but not really mean that? Oh, yes, there were. And basically what had happened was this. The legal experts, the experts in the law, had come up with oaths that you could take that would create the appearance that you really were promising something where really you weren't. And what you did was you could say, I really mean this, I'm going to do this. But if you were not swearing by a certain thing, God, the consequences were not that bad if you didn't keep your word. And so some people were making promises but not keeping those promises. You can see that playing out in Matthew chapter 23, where he's talking to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And there he talks about how you make a distinction between oaths that are made based on the temple and oaths that are made based on the gold in the temple. Or oaths that are based on the altar or oath that is made upon the gift on the altar. Those two distinctions are supposed to make a big deal distinction. Now, Jesus doesn't include that here, but that is in Matthew 23. But what Jesus talks about here is you don't need to be going around swearing in this way. Well, I swear by heaven. No mention of God there, right? Except for Jesus says, well, heaven is God's throne. Okay, well, I swear by earth. No mention of Jesus, God there, but Jesus goes, oh, earth is his footstool. Well, I'll swear by Jerusalem. That sounds really good. You'll believe me if I swear by Jerusalem, right? Well, that's the city of the great king. And who's the great king? God. Okay, well, I'll swear by my head. Now, I know there are some of you who are kind of nitpickers, and you kind of go, well, I can turn my hair white or black. And some of you have been very practiced in the art of that. But here's the deal. The deal is this, eventually that dye runs out and the color of the hair is exposed, right? Because you can't will that hair to change its color. God can change things, but not you in that way. And what Jesus is making clear, don't be using all these formulas to be getting around the truth and having the form of, I promise, you can trust me now, I promise you this. In the name of heaven, I promise you this. No. He said, don't do that. Don't be playing that game. Don't be deceiving people with promises. Don't be manipulating people for your own advantage to promises. Don't be creating these appearances by your religious language. And we all do it. We all have different ways of doing it. I mean, I've been guilty of this. I've been guilty of saying to somebody, I'll pray for you. Now, that's a word given to somebody. Have you ever said that to somebody and then you never prayed about them? Maybe I'm the only person that's ever been guilty of that. But see, Jesus is he's getting to something deeper because he goes, what I want you to do is this, simply become the person that when you say yes or no, see, that's the smallest little form of verbal communication. In the smallest way you use language, you be ethical and moral, and you be a person of your word so that when you say yes or when you say no, people understand what you mean, and they go, I trust you. Jesus is trying to get us towards communication integrity, wholeness, where what we say is an expression of who we are in our hearts, and there's no duplicity, there's no playing games with it. Instead, we're learning to speak the truth in love. And sometimes people look at that passage and go, well, you shouldn't take an oath. If you go to trial and go to court, you shouldn't, when they swear you in, you shouldn't be swearing in. Look, I'm not going to press anything on that particularly, but I just want to be clear with this. Jesus later in Matthew 26, takes an oath. Paul, in a number of places, in his letters, in his story, he takes an oath. Now, was Jesus, was Paul, were they disobeying this idea of do not take an oath? You see, I think Jesus is talking about something different than whether or not you take an oath or make a vow. I think what he's doing is this. Don't get confused in that language. Without taking an oath, you be, in all situations, a truth teller. And when you are trying to play this game and not telling the truth and trying to get away with it to your own advantage, do you know where that's coming from? What does Jesus say? It's coming from the evil one. Yikes. So am I going to be, in my communication with you and with other people, am I going to be paying attention to Jesus as my teacher? Or am I going to kind of go, well, I really like the evil one because he makes my life so much simpler? Well, you see, Jesus is talking about communication integrity. Now, why? Why is that so important? Well, look, if I'm not telling the truth in my relationships with Jackie, with this church, in my friendships and all that kind, if I'm always lying and all that, am I going to be building trust? No, over time, I'm going to be undermining that relationship so that I'll be saying things and people will be looking at me, I don't believe you. I don't believe that's true. And here's what goes on too. It's not that just my lack of integrity with my word affects my relationships. It damages me because it makes me someone, I'm telling you, I don't want to be. I don't know about you, but I don't want people going around and go, he's a liar. I mean, is that really your desire for people to be going around and go about you, go, well, you're a great liar. Well, thank you very much. I take that. No. We all go, well, I'm not a liar. But let me just tell you this. If we're not careful, the more we say things that we don't mean, the more we are positioning ourselves by habit to become liars. You see, Jesus wants integrity in our word and our deed. And what that means is that deep in my heart, I am someone. And when I speak, it is to be an expression of who I am. And when I act, it's to be an expression of who I am. If you read in Ephesians, you see that's really the pattern of Ephesians. In Ephesians, it makes clear that there is this grace that enters my life and it changes me on the inside. I'm a different person. And Paul keeps praying in chapter 1 and 3 that you and I will know the power of this grace in our lives, experience in our lives, the power of the Spirit working in our lives, the power that is exerted in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the power that will give us discernment, insight, and that there's this thing that happens from outside of us that's God's grace, but also in chapters 4 through 6, Paul makes it clear, just the way Jesus does, there are practices, things that we do, and Paul says a lot about speech. Kinds of things you say and things that you don't say. They become an expression of who you are in your heart, and also it forms who you are in your heart. And that's a problem with not telling the truth and getting in the habit of not telling the truth and getting by with it. It creates this person that I really don't want to be, and suddenly I discover I have a problem because nobody's believing me, and I try to find ways to make them trust me, and I'm surprised that they're not trusting me. I've watched in churches some elderships who, with a church like this, will make statements and you kind of don't know what they're saying, and you feel like you're being manipulated in a certain direction, and you can't ever be clear about it, and that's the pattern. And eventually those elders go, why don't the people want to follow us? Because they don't know where you're going. They don't know what you're talking about. You're not really being honest because we're always trying to mask things and cover things up instead of do what Jesus says, and that is have, in love, an honest expression of what is going on. Now, here's the problem. A lot of times you discover that you've got a communication problem way after the problem has happened down deep inside of you. You know, the last couple of weeks in my office have been very disturbing. You know what's been very disturbing? Ants. Now, they used to be in Anthony's office. I don't know if he kind of go, hey, get out of here, and he cast them out like a demon. They just came over my office. I mean, I kind of would like to think that, but no, I can't do that. You know why? Because they're kind of all over my desk, crawling around and all that kind of stuff, and I've even found myself kind of getting itchy and kind of go, ugh. But what I did was I opened one of my desk drawers, and something I stuck away in my desk drawer about a year ago, some candy that was kind of you know, like Luden's cough drops and some in Hall's cough drops. It was there with the bag was open, all that kind of stuff. And so, you know what? After about a year or so, the ants migrated from Mr. Lancaster's office to Mr. Corley's office, and they were having a really good time. And I'm in there kind of bam, bam, bam. And I grab that stuff and I throw that stuff away. And they still keep showing up. They keep crawling around. I don't like it. But look, that problem was caused by something I did a long time ago. And if you're having a problem because people don't trust you in a relationship, it's because a long time ago you began practices. And when you've spoken, people have found you don't really mean what you say. You think you can manipulate people with what you say. And now what's happening is they're no longer trusting you. It may be causing a problem in your family. It may be causing problems in business. I remember my father so often being frustrated by Christians who said they would do something in a business deal, orally commit to it, and never follow through. That's very upsetting to him. Because in his mind, your yes should be yes, and your no should be no. Now, I say all this because I'm looking what Jesus is saying about communication, and I see not only did he teach this, but he practiced it. Look at the trial in Matthew chapter 26. In Matthew chapter 26, the Jewish leaders he's being critical of about their oaths and all that kind of stuff, they're the ones who are putting him on trial. It says they're searching for false witnesses over there. And finally, the high priest puts Jesus on oath, are you really the Messiah? And when he puts Jesus on oath, that's when Jesus speaks. He breaks his silence. Are you the Messiah? Jesus under oath says, so once again, Jesus under oath, he says, yes, I am. And then he explains what that means by Messiah. And the next thing you know, those priests are ripping their coats. and they're ready to crucify him and all that kind of stuff. You see, the irony in that story is they're not really pursuing the truth, because the man who is refusing to lie and to tell the truth that they don't want to hear, he's causing them to wish him ill and to destroy him. And in chapter 26, you know what else you find? You find Jesus with the integrity of his word, and the Jewish leaders as not having integrity, what they're doing. And then what you find out is out in the courtyard, there's this man who's a follower of Jesus who's heard him say, let your yes be yes, your no be no. And 3 times he's asked, aren't you one of his disciples? Now, what is the correct answer to that if Peter's giving that answer? Aren't you one of his disciples? What is the correct answer? Yes. What did he answer? No. Is that integrity in communication? Well, part of me can see why. I mean, it's a dangerous arena. But one of the beautiful things is, and the reason I bring Peter up here is because there's a lot of Peter in me. And it's easier to give a sermon on integrity in your word than to live that out. But it's in John 21 where Jesus works with that man who didn't have integrity in his word. He doesn't give up on him. He doesn't condemn him. That lack of integrity is not the unforgivable sin, but it is something that has to be dealt with in my heart. It's something that has to be set back in right relationship with Jesus if I'm going to continue on my way with him. That's so beautiful. You can be forgiven, but the forgiveness doesn't mean, it's really not that important. Jesus gave his word, this is important. He doesn't teach this and go, it's really not important. It's just a good lesson. It's not what we're saying. Now, the other thing I want to say, and then we'll be done. Because Jesus was truthful with those leaders, he is taken to the cross and crucified. But look at this practice of ethical communication on the cross, right? When he has those feelings of abandonment deep in his heart, what does he say? He's honest. He's not trying to say things that sound nice to everybody. He quotes Psalm 21, and he says, or Psalm 22. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's honestly what there's that moment in his life where there's feelings over it, and he's crying out because of the pain and the agony, because he's on that cross, because I'm a sinner. I have been a liar. I have failed what he's asked me to do. And he's there on the cross because I need what he's doing there on the cross. That's why he's there. But he feels God against him in some way. But notice what else he does. There are people standing beneath the cross, and they're reviling him. They're saying ugly things and go, come on off the cross. You because let's be the Messiah. That shows what you're doing. And they're saying all kinds of things. They're using language to curse him. Got that? And what does he do with language? Does he go, same to you? No. He says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And in that final word on the cross, what does he say? It is that word of deepest trust, where he says to the God that he asked the question, my God, why have you forsaken me? But that last word on the cross is not that one of the deep agony. It is the one of trust that says, Father, oh my precious Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. The integrity of the word of Jesus is part of the reason why you and I hear him calling us and go, he really wants you to be following him. When he invites you to come, he means that word. His yes to you is one that he's willing to stand by. His yes to you is one that he died for. His yes to you is one that will never be taken away because he is telling the truth in love. He sees in you something wonderful that you cannot see in yourself. And he's saying, follow me and we'll do this thing together. This morning as we close, if you've never made that decision to follow Jesus Christ, we had a little girl this morning in service. Her mother was baptized last week. She was baptized this morning. Her brother was baptized about a month ago. Kind of a family conversion. I kind of like that. But Jesus is calling and saying, follow me. And what he will do if we will gracefully say yes will astonish us all. Let's stand together. Let's sing.